In this class, I'm going to explain language translators. In the first unit, it is the topic under the first unit, that is language translators. So before going into this language translators, I will explain a brief about the previous class. The last class we have seen what is an algorithm and flowchart and the differences between algorithm and flowchart. After that, what is a language and the types of languages. What is a language and the types of languages, and the difference between high level languages and low level languages, and the advantages of high level languages over low level languages. And in continuation of that, that is the present topic, language translators. In continuation of that, the present topic, that is language translators. So what is this language translators? A language translator is a program. A language translator is a program. It translates one language into another language, or source to object code. Source to object or low level code, which can be directly understood by a machine. Which can be directly understood by a machine. So here, in a brief, the types of languages are broadly classified. The computer languages are broadly classified into two kinds: high level languages and low level languages. So coming to this low level languages, these are again classified into assembly language and machine language. Assembly language and machine language. Here the machine language is a binary language. Here the machine language is a binary language which can be directly understood by a machine. It is in the form of zeros and ones. It is in the form of zeros and ones. And the assembly language is a language which is specific to a particular architecture, and the instructions written in the assembly language by using some mnemonics. Generally, the assembly language instructions used a symbols called mnemonics. With the help of that mnemonics, the programs or the code is written under this assembly language. Here the problem is that after that, so here the problem is that a user or a programmer is very difficult to understand the instructions written under machine language or assembly language. So in a simple words, it is very difficult to learn a machine or assembly language for a programmer to write the instructions. In order to avoid that difficulty, in order to avoid that difficulty, the high level languages were introduced. And the high level languages are, some of the high level languages are C, C++, Visual Basic, Java, etc. So now the languages which are in the market all are comes under high level programming languages. So here the high level languages, importance of high level languages or advantage of high level languages is, it is just like a similar English language. It is just like similar English language. Everybody, anybody can use it. Everybody or anybody can use this high level language. Anybody can easily understand this high level languages and write programs by using this high level languages. That is the main advantage of high level language. It is very easy to understand and easy to write the code because it is just like similar to the English language. Similar to the English language. So, in order to avoid the difficulty of learning low level languages that are assembly or machine language, the high level languages were introduced in the market. But here the drawback, or but here the problem is, the computer or the machine or the system understands only machine language, that is the binary language. Machine language, that is the binary language. But the machine language or binary language is very much difficult to a programmer to write programs or to develop the applications in machine language or assembly language. The assembly language is mainly the purpose, the code written in assembly language is related to a specific architecture of a particular devices. So the assembly language is used to develop the device drivers. The device drivers. We all are familiar with the device drivers. If you attach any device to your computer, it requires some software. If you attach any device to your computer, it cannot run, it cannot identify that device by your computer. It cannot be recognized, it may not be recognized. So a specific software is needed to run that particular device. So that software, that is called device drivers. Those are all softwares are called as device drivers. The code or the program or the instructions to develop these device drivers are written in a assembly language, are written in a assembly language. In the assembly language comes under it is the category of low level language. And the machine language is the computer understandable language. It can be directly understood by the machine. It is in the form of zeros and ones. But here the problem is, a programmer or a user is very much difficult to learn the code of machine language and write the instructions under this machine language. So in order to avoid such a difficulty for a programmer, the high level languages were introduced in the market. The high level languages were introduced in the market. So, but the problem is the computer understands only machine language. The programmer is compatible or is familiar to write the instructions in a high level language, but the machine is familiar or process the code which is written in a machine language. So here the problem is, the programmer writes the instructions in a high level language, the machine understands the code which is written in a machine language, zeros and ones. So to execute, to process that code, it requires some special softwares. It requires some special software. That softwares are called as language translators. That softwares are called as language translator. A language translator is a special program designed or developed for the purpose of converting a high level language code into machine language and the same back from machine language to high level language, vice versa. Because a programmer write the instruction or understand the code and write the instruction easily in a high level language, but the machine cannot understand the instructions written in a high level language. The machine executes or understands and knows only the instructions which are written in the binary language or low level language. So in order to communicate these two, there is a need of a special programs or a mediator. We understand, we assume just like a mediator or a special program required. That special program is called language translator. Language translator. Okay, language translator. I will show you one diagram for better understanding for this. Okay, so see here, I'm opening this one application, paint application. So just assume this is a programmer, and just assume this is a programmer, and this is just like your computer or machine. Okay, this is a programmer, this is a user or the programmer, and this is the computer. This is the computer, right? This is computer. Here the computer understands only machine language. Here the computer understands only machine language, and the programmer in general writes the instructions. The programmer in general writes the instructions in a high level language. High level language. Here it requires, here these two needs to communicate. These two needs to communicate. How it? These two needs to communicate. Okay. So this is the high level language programmer, and this is the machine language, that is low level language. These two things needs to be communicate. These two things needs to communicate. So here it requires some special program, that is called, the special program is called language translator. It requires some special program which is called as a language translator. Okay, language translator. It requires some special program that is called as language translator. Okay, is it clear? Right, here this is a programmer, this is a programmer, this is a programmer, and this is a computer. So in order to communicate these two, first the instruction is converted into some machine language, and the machine language given to the computer. Okay, right, I am closing this one. I am again entering into this PPT. Here the language translators, that is, in order to convert the assembly language instructions into machine language, assembly language and machine language both are comes under low level language only. So in order to convert the assembly language instructions into machine language, there is a language translator is required, that is called assembler. Assembler is one of the language translator. Assembler is one of the language translator, and interpreter is one of the language translator, and compiler is one of the language translator. Assembler is one of the language translator, interpreter is one of the language translator, and compiler is one of the language translator. The assembler translate assembly language programs into machine code. Here the computer understands only machine code. The computer understands only machine code, that is binary code. The computer understands only machine code or binary code. So the instructions written in assembly language cannot be directly understood by a machine. The instructions which are written in assembly language cannot be directly understood by a machine. So in order to convert that assembly language instructions into machine language, there is a need of one language translator. There is a need of one language translator. That language translator name is assembler. That language translator name is assembler. Assembly language, assembler is one of the language translator. Assembler is one of the language translator. It converts assembly language instructions into machine language. It converts assembly language instructions into machine language to understand by the computer. An assembler translates assembly language programs into machine code. The output of an assembler is called an object file, which contains a combination of machine instructions as well as the data required to place these instructions in memory. The output of an assembler is called an object file. So after converting a assembly language program into machine language, it produces a file which is called object file. It produces a file which is called object file. It contains, the object file contains, it is the combination of machine instructions and the data, as well as the data required to place these instructions in the memory. Here the point we need to understand is here the point we need to understand is here the point we need to understand is the assembler is one of the language translator. The assembler is one of the language translator. It converts it converts assembly language instructions into machine language. It converts assembly language instructions into machine language, not the high level language, not the high level language. It converts only the instructions which are written in assembly language converted into machine language. So it produces a file which is called object file. It produces a file which is called an object file. It produces a file which is called an object file. It contains the machine language instructions. The object file contains machine language instructions and the data required to place these instructions in memory. And the next language translator or another language translator is interpreter. It is a kind of language translator. It is a common kind of language translator. The interpreter is a common language translator or one of the language translator. It converts or translates it converts or translates a program that is a high level language program into machine code line by line. An interpreter is a common kind of language translator. An interpreter is a common kind of language translator. Instead of producing target program as a translation, instead of producing target program as a translation, an interpreter appears to directly execute the operation specified in the source program on inputs supplied by the user. On inputs supplied by the user. An input supplied by the user. An interpreter reads a statement from the input, converts it into an intermediate code, execute it, then takes the next statement in sequence. In contrast, an interpreter reads a statement from the input, converts it into an intermediate code, execute it, then takes the next statement in sequence. In simple, in a simple way, we can say that an interpreter is a kind of language translator. It's a kind of language translator. It converts the high level programming language instructions into low level language, that is machine language, line by line, instruction by instruction, or statement by statement. If any errors in the statement, it may be a syntax errors. It observes the syntactical errors defined in the language, defined in the programming language. It observes the syntactical errors defined in the programming language. If any errors it encounters, it identify the interpreter encounters any error while while translating the program into machine code, then it raises an error. It gives its error message that the statement has some errors. That the statement has errors. It means that it translates translates line line by line of source code to machine code, line by line of source code to machine code, line by line of source code to machine code. It converts or it translates high level programming language instructions into low level or machine code directly, line by line, directly line by line. If an error occurs, an interpreter stops execution and reports it. If it observes error or if an error occurs, an interpreter stops execution and reports it. This is the, we can say, this is the drawback of an interpreter. We can say this is the drawback of an interpreter is if an error occurs in a line, the interpreter halts the process of execution and it stops the execution and it reports that error. It means in the program a error has occurred. It means in the program an error has occurred. So that is the drawback of an interpreter. That is the drawback of an interpreter. And next language or another language translator is compiler. Compiler. So one of the language translator is assembler. After that, that is another language translator is interpreter. An interpreter converts high level language code into machine language. Here the drawback in interpreter is it converts line by line of source code into machine code. If any error it occurs, it reports it immediately and stop the process of execution. In order to avoid such difficulty, another language translator was introduced, that is compiler. The advantage of compiler is it converts the total code or entire source code written in any programming, that is high level programming language, written in a high level programming language into machine code at a time, into machine code at a time. A compiler is a computer program. It is also a program, it is also a software, it is also a program and it is also a software. It converts the total code, entire code written in a high level programming language into object code, into a object code. It is source code to machine code, source code to machine code. And these compilers are differ from one language to another language, one high level programming language to another high level programming language. If you observe C language, C is a C is one of the high level programming language. So in order to execute a C program, it requires a compiler, that is C compiler. To understand the syntax and the rules of that language and execute the programs which are written in a C level C programming language, it requires a language translator, that is called compiler, that is specific to a C programming language. Like that, each and every programming language in the market, if you take another programming language, that is C++, Java, or any programming or any high level programming language, it requires its own compilers, its own compiler, and the vendor who develop the programming languages, they also develop the compiler, the compiler only understands the rules and regulations and the syntax of the particular programming language and converts that programming language instructions to a machine code in order to execute that code by a computer. So here interpreter is also one of the language translator, that is high level programming language translator, and compiler is also one of the high level programming language translator. The differ or the difference between these two is the interpreter converts the code, that is line by line. The source code is converted to object code line by line. The source code is converted into object code line by line. And the compiler converts the source code into object code through total program, total statements at once, at once, at once. So this is the advantage of compiler over interpreter. This is the advantage of compiler over interpreter. So in a simple way, we say that it is one of the language translator, that is the compiler is one of the language translator to convert a high level language like C program into a machine code, vice versa. Assembler is a one of the language translator program. Assembler is one of the language translator program. It converts assembly language instructions into machine language. It converts assembly language instructions into machine language. And interpreter converts high level language instructions into machine language line by line. The compiler converts high level programming language instructions into machine language, total code at once, and then next, a linker. A linker is a computer program, or it is a software. It is comes under the category of system software. The linker comes under the category of system software. So what actually the requirement of linker in the process of execution of a program from high level language to machine language. So each and every high level programming languages have some predefined functions. Each and every or any high level programming language have some predefined functions. So that functions are available in the library of that particular language. Library of that particular language. So the linker is a program or it is a software. It establishes or it creates a link to that particular functions which are available in the library of that particular software and to the object code and to the object code at the time of compilation. At the time of this process is done at the time of compiling the program. At the time of compiling the program, generally we use the predefined functions like input statement, that is giving the input through the keyboard to a program. This is nothing but a standard input device, that is a keyboard. So it is an input function. There is an input function in any language to take input from the user through the keyboard. So the program or the code to access the keyboard and to read the values through the keyboard, there is a specific function in all the high level programming language. That code of that specific function are available in the library. Similar, a output statement. Each and every program requires to send the output to a monitor. Output to a monitor. So that is with the help of a predefined function called output function. So the code related to this output function is also available in the library of that particular programming language. So while compiling a program, a source, a high level program into machine code, the compiler converts the source code into object code. At that time, the linker is activated. It is a special software. It is also a software. It comes under the category of system software. So, while compiling, in the process of compilation, the linker is activated by the operating system and it creates a link between this object code and to a code which is available in the library, because we have used the predefined functions, that is standard input and standard output, standard input and standard output. So the code of these functions are written in the library. So execute these statements, input as well as output statements. It requires to be add that code into our program. So the linker software, a linker is a software, it creates a link to that library folder and the library file and to the object file. Linker is a computer program that links and merges various objects files together in order to make an executable file. The major task of a linker is to search and locate referenced module or routines in a program and to determine the memory location where these codes will be loaded and making the program instruction to have absolute reference. In a simple way, the loader linker combines object code and library code into executable code. In a simple way, we say that it combines object code and library code into executable code. The library code and object code into a executable code. So this is the use of a software called linker, and another one that is loader. So loader is also a program which is activated. It is a part of operating system and activated by the operating system. So the work of a loader or the responsibility of a loader is, after converting the source code into objective code for execution and creating links or attaching links to a library to this source code or to objective code, and the loader loads this program into the computer memory for execution. The loader loads this program into computer memory for execution. Loader is a part of operating system and is responsible for loading executable files into memory and execute them. It calculates the size of a program, instructions and data, and create memory space for it. It initializes various registers to initiate execution. So loader is a part of operating system and is responsible for loading executable files into memory and execute them. Loader is a part of operating system and is responsible for loading executable files into memory and execute them. So here, in order to execute a high level language or a program written in a high level language into the process of execution, that is displaying the output, that is converting it into machine code, it requires language translators specific to that language, and a linker and a loader, and a linker and a loader, and a linker and a loader. So here the language translators or assembler is different. It converts assembly language instructions into machine language, and the interpreter and compiler both are purpose to convert high level programming language into machine language. But the interpreter converts the high level programming language into machine language line by line. The interpreter converts high level programming language into machine language line by line, and the compiler converts the total code at once. The compiler converts the total code, the total program at once into the source code to a low level machine code or object code. The source code to a low level machine code or object code. So the linker and loader are the softwares comes under the category of system software. The linker creates links to a object file and the programs which are available in the library. We use so many predefined functions to develop the applications. In order to create, execute that predefined functions, the code for that functions are available in the library files. So a linker creates a link to this object file and the library file for execution. And the next one is loader. Loader is a part of operating system program. The responsibility of this loader is it loads the total program, the source code into source files into the computer memory, that is RAM. That is RAM for execution. That is RAM for execution. These are the importances of language translators and linker and loader. Okay.